I'm so excited for this one. Welcome to the Women Inspired Podcast. I'm your host, April Seifert. There is nothing more powerful than a woman who is inspired to action, and that's my number one goal, to inspire you, my listeners, to take action in your lives. Each week, I get to interview some of the most inspiring women, and I'm bringing those interviews to you. Let's do it. Claudia Perlich is a professional in the growing field of data science. With more than 50 published scientific articles, she's a widely acclaimed expert on big data and machine learning applications. Claudia is the past winner of Advertising Research Foundation's Grand Innovation Award, and she's been selected for Crain's New York's 40 Under 40 list, Wired Magazine's Smart List, and Fast Company's 100 Most Creative People. Claudia holds multiple patents in machine learning, and she's worked at the IBM Watson Research Center, focusing on data analytics and machine learning. She is currently the chief scientist at a startup company called the Dstillary. She holds a PhD in information systems from New York University, where she continues to teach at the Stern School of Business, and a master's in computer science from the University of Colorado. Claudia, welcome to the podcast today. I'm so excited that you're here.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me.
So we want to get to know you a little bit before I dive in and start hammering you with questions. So give us a little bit of background about yourself in your own words. Help us get to know you.
So I'm coming from many different points in my life, and I have no idea what you and your listeners find particularly exciting. I came to the U.S. Back in '98, as many people, for studies. And before that, so originally, as you probably can tell by now by my accent, I grew up in Germany, and East Germany at that. So having a bit of a broader experience in terms of culture, I somehow ended up in computer science, mostly by lack of other convictions. When I was 18, I had no real idea what I wanted to do. I had plenty of ideas what I didn't want to do. And so my dad said, hey, just do computer science, and they will be needing computers everywhere. And he certainly was right on the money with that one. And as I kind of went through my studies, I, by accident, really by accident, I wasn't planning on that, signed up for an exchange program with Boulder, Colorado, and met this fascinating guy who was teaching a course on artificial neural networks. And that sounded just so cool. I had no idea what I was getting myself into. And now, today, many of you may have heard it under the new term of deep learning and AI. But it's really one of the many tools that people have played around with for a while in data mining and predictive modeling and all that stuff that right now is really very much in the news. I had no idea, but I got absolutely fascinated by playing around with data already back then in Boulder. And so building my career, moved on to come back to the US and get a PhD. Ultimately went to work for the IBM Watson Lab for a good 6 years, working on many different applications, but all of them in the realm of how can you use data to make better decisions, and whether this is in business or in medicine, across the board. I always found that particular topic really, really interesting and challenging. And a good 7 years ago now, I was approached by some really cool startup out here in New York City that was working in ad tech. Now, ad tech wasn't really the dream of my career plans, but it turned out to be this incredible time where data was massively abandoned in the ad tech environment, much more so than I had ever seen anywhere else. And so I joined the company as a chief scientist, and part of the appeal is that they let me have an awful lot of hobbies. So I'm very much engaged more broadly in groups in kind of ad tech, or specifically in machine learning. So, for instance, there are groups like DataKind in New York City that volunteer data science skills to nonprofits to see how they can help there. or Data and Society that really is focusing on some of the challenging questions of like, what's the long-term impact? And are we really doing the right thing, embracing all these data things? And what should we be concerned about when talking about, for instance, privacy? So that's something where I feel I can contribute aside from my day job. And I also have a bit of a teaching gig at NYU that I enjoy a lot, kind of sharing some of the experiences I've made through the years.
That's an awesome background. I love that you have gotten involved with other organizations in addition to what you're doing during, your day-to-day job. DataKind is awesome. They do some really neat work, and I love that they pair up data scientists with, organizations that really need help in that area and maybe couldn't afford to have someone like you on staff. Something that I want to dive into before we go any further, for those people who are listening to this and aren't super familiar with machine learning and data science, can you give us sort of the Cliff's Notes version of it and maybe give an example of how just an average person would encounter a machine learning algorithm in their day-to-day life and maybe not even realize it?
Oh, that's a tall ask there. All right, so data science being a hot topic today. I mean, in the old days, 10 years ago, you were just plain a geek when you did the kind of work I'm doing. And now it's a sexy job. So let's start where you encounter data science and machine learning. And the truth is, when it's really well done, you don't even notice. So it almost infiltrates your lives in a very unobtrusive way. So you hopefully don't know that you have a spam filter. If you do know that you have a spam filter, you probably know it because it failed and gave you spam that you didn't want to read. So one of the examples that most of you should be aware of is that when you get your email, you get a lot of stuff you don't want because people are trying to advertise to you, for instance, all the time. And there is an algorithm embedded in your email system that somehow decides based on the words, how often they are misspelled, and where the email came from, that this was probably not an email you really wanted to see. Now, how does the algorithm know that? Well, that's where machine learning really originates. You look at many people's email, and a lot of the emails that people have said, I really didn't want that. It doesn't have to be you saying it. Just many, many people having in the past decided that this is really email they don't want to get. And then you give these as examples. It's almost like teaching school children the alphabet or simple math. You tell them what the right answer is. Here's an email that was spam, and here's an email that wasn't. And if you give a machine a lot of those, they're kind of slow, relatively speaking, learning certain things. So it's not like kids in class, but you have to give them hundreds of thousands of these examples. But when you have hundreds of thousands of examples, they can really learn amazing stuff that school children ultimately can't learn. So machine learning is, if you want, the automated computer version of teaching through example. You give them enough examples, and the algorithms then starts to learn, hey, every time I see this weirdly spelled thing starting with a V, and it pretends to be a pharma-related thing, it's probably not an email you wanted to get, because I've seen many examples that look like that. And what you now see in many other domains, whether this is self-driving cars, all the recommendations you get on Amazon, the things that get delivered to you when you search on Google, all of these algorithms really draw learnings and insights from interacting with hundreds and thousands of people where they're being taught what the right answer should be.
That's a really great way of explaining what can be a really complicated black box field. A lot of people, I love that you gave the answer in a way that people could understand it, because a lot of people who work in this field try very hard to show how smart they are and show how fantastic they are and make it completely unable to be understood. So I think it's great that you gave a really straightforward answer. So you mentioned that you got interested in computer science when you were 18, just based on your dad saying, hey, I think you should be in computer science. Is that really how simple it was? He just suggested and you said, yeah, okay, cool. I'm going to go code for like 10 years.
Well, first off, I was a bit brief. So I'm kind of the classical tomboy with interests very much on the mathematical side. So I was always very good in school in math. I actually loved biology and natural sciences, but when you actually look under the hood, what people who study biology typically end up getting to do, that was a lot less appealing. So on the other hand, pure math, I'm kind of practical. I like to solve real problems and kind of live in the world. So math itself wasn't super exciting beyond a certain level, despite the fact I was good at it. And also, again, I was 18 back then. You didn't have all these thousands of possible directions in terms of studies, but it was much more limited. There were like 20, 25, maybe 30 main directions you could go in Germany in terms of your area of study. So once you look at what was reasonably there in terms of choices, he was absolutely right. And so I actually never coded before I was 18 getting into the program. So
Wow.
The coding part was the hard part to pick up on. And thankfully, I had a couple of good friends that kind of lifted me through the first semester. Was never so happy getting a D as in my first semester of computer science.
You were good in school, and then you joined CS.
I was good in school,
hard.
yeah.
That's really cool. So you said you went to college. You were in Germany when you were in undergrad, I'm assuming, and then you did graduate school in Colorado. Is that right?
Yeah, so that was a year where we could transfer some credits. So I got a master in the computer science department at Boulder.
Got it. So one of the things that we've noticed in the U.S., and maybe it's the case in other countries as well, I'm curious about your experience having been in both, is that there's a really big underrepresentation of women in STEM fields. We just see this divergence as kids start to move into really about the time that math starts getting hard. We see boys and girls start to split up a little bit more, and girls stop pushing as hard into more difficult math, into things that would fall underneath, STEM careers, and it just leaves them not as set up well to go into that in college. So it really starts very early, but the result of it is that there's not a ton of women, or there's not an equal amount, I guess, of women who are in studying STEM fields within universities today. Did you notice that in either Germany or the US, and what was your experience there?
I certainly noticed, and I will have different takes on that answer. So as to the state of affairs in Germany, it was exactly that. When I grew up in East Germany, I had really good female math teachers all the way up. So it wasn't a matter of kind of mentor figures. And my mom herself, she worked in radiology, so she certainly had a very technical background as well. Mm-hmm. So in terms of family, I think there's a lot of influence there. But what you observed was certainly very true and obvious once I moved to now West Germany. I studied in Darmstadt near Frankfurt. And I think the original rate, computer science, first semester was like 6% women.
Wow.
And you literally knew every single one of them. The truth is that it was noticeable. I personally have never really thought about it one way or another. I spent my life on both ends of the spectrum. One of my kind of hobbies is horseback riding, where you basically find no men whatsoever. Well, you do, but very few, at least in terms of this interest. By the same token, I used to compete in powerlifting, where that's kind of going to hardcore gyms for lifting, at least 25 years ago, was certainly not a very kind of female-friendly environment either. And I personally never had very strong feelings or objections about it one way or another. Now, this being said, I certainly do notice today, and as I was running a large data science conference in New York City back in 2014, one does notice that it's hard to get kind of an equal number of good speakers and make sure that there's a kind of equal representation. It takes effort. I'm not saying it's not possible, but it takes effort. Mm-hmm. So this being said, by the same token, I'm honestly wondering what is the right balance that we should be aiming for, because I also don't really like to be the poster child of feminism in machine learning and data mining. Yep. And I certainly don't want to be told, oh, it's so great that you could come to our conference, give this keynote. We were really trying to get the rate of women up. That makes me feel really great. Thank you very much.
Right.
Now, so here's the thing. Having kind of achieved a certain level of success in this career, I feel like almost owe it the next generation to deal with these scenarios and say, well, I personally may not feel great about being told that that's why I invited. And by the way, I have no lack of confidence in my abilities, so I'm not really bummed about it. But by the same token, maybe it does help inspire the next generation and gives them a sense that there is truly a trajectory of making a career here. So I'm a little bit ambivalent about how aggressive one should be kind of enforcing this topic. And I'm also ambivalent about statements like, well, do we really need half and half? Is that even remotely the right kind of objective we're trying to get to? We should all be allowed to follow our dreams, whatever they may be. And I do believe that different people have different dreams. So ultimately, I don't think 50-50 is the right threshold for us to declare we are done. For me, I feel we achieved what we wanted if it stops being a topic, if it stops being something we notice that there aren't enough women for our taste. And when I stop having to think about whether I got invited because I was a woman or whether I didn't get invited because I was a woman.
I have the biggest smile on my face that you can't see right now. It's, oh my God, I love everything that you just said, because you're right, 50-50, it's really, that's an arbitrary proportion. Yes, it's proportional to the population, but at the same point, we don't know if everyone was given the exact same opportunities, if everyone was given the exact same, ability to express their dreams and chase after them, that's where it would land. So somewhere out there, if you think about what the true proportion of data science inclined men and women would be, maybe it isn't 50-50. I don't know. But I love the way that you described, I guess we're going to be done when we don't have to talk about this anymore, when people don't feel weird for one way or another. The other thing that I really loved about what you said is you are happy to be that example for the next generation. One of the things that, and people who listen to this podcast have heard me say it a number of times, but one of the reasons why I'm doing this is that it's really hard to envision yourself doing something if you've never seen anyone else like you do it first. So I think it's really important to show just an example of examples of women doing a variety of different things to say, hey, if you want to go be a skydiver, go check out this woman on the podcast in the early episodes who was a skydiver. By the way, if you want to be a power lifter, you've mentioned it, and you should check out episode number 9. We interviewed a power lifter who has set some serious records in the sport. I mean, there are a variety of different things that women can do. Here's some examples. What thing do you think looks cool? Go do it. So I think it's really neat that you have characterized it that way, because it's not just a black and white, it has to be 50-50 sort of thing. And I think it's really cool that you have described it that way. And I also love that you said, I'm confident in my abilities, so I don't care, I'm not freaked out about it. That's a hard thing for people to say, is for them to say, no, I'm actually really good at this. And you are, obviously, given the credentials and the level with which your career you've been able to achieve in your career.
Well, what you don't see right now is me blushing, but okay, let's go.
So think about, what does your average day look like, and what is, I guess, the most challenging part of the work that you do?
So, all right, let's start with my day. So the other parts of my life that I typically don't kind of broadcast very much. I have a 12-year-old son that I'm raising in not exactly a single mom, but kind of a co-parenting situation. And I'm really, really appreciative and lucky having been able kind of to juggle a real career and being there for my son. So he is a big part of that. I wouldn't want to go too much into that, but I'm having a lot of flexibility in terms of how I use my day. And so I'm really trying to find time blocks to interact with people here in the office. I mean, one of the most fun parts for me still today is brainstorming with other people about problems they have and how to possibly solve them. The kind of puzzles, the stuff I loved in fifth grade math, puzzles they gave us still today absolutely fascinates me. Give me a good problem and hey, I'll drop everything and jump on it. So I still get to do a lot of that. I'm also doing a lot more kind of public work similar to this. I'm giving a lot of talks. I think I calculated in 2016, it was like 60 something speaking engagements over the year. So my company appreciates my role as an ambassador, not just for women in data science, but specifically for the capacities and the cool stuff we do here. And I really like that a lot. So I enjoy that part. And so between kind of those things, I also love to jump on specific projects and get my hands dirty with data and kind of look around there. I'm not a hardcore coder, so I wouldn't be building here in some kind of agile environment, which is how they run software these days, spend a lot of time coding, but I still love to play around very much hands-on, and that's probably the other third of this. What's difficult? So I think it's a blessing and a curse in terms of having the flexibility and the freedom. So just finding kind of a good way of setting priorities for yourself that A, makes you effective, and B, gives you a sense of achievement. It's very easy to be dissatisfied if you don't get everything you ever promised yourself to do. And so the older you get, up to end of high school, I was absolutely on top of stuff. During my undergrad and grad studies, I was still okay. It kind of worked out. And starting with my PhD, stuff just fell apart. You have to realize that it's okay to drop certain balls. Mm-hmm. And you just need to get really, really good at figuring out which are the balls you need to care about.
Absolutely.
So, and that really just gets kind of more and more intense as you kind of continue your career. And the more kind of high-level things you do that are not, oh, I built this algorithm and it performed and it did this and that, that's very satisfying, but you get to do less and less of that. And so the sense of walking into your door in the evening at home and feeling, hey, I achieved something, that's hard to preserve as you have kind of a more flexible and vague description of what your job actually is.
Right. Yeah. I can totally relate to that. That means that makes a ton of sense. So as you look back over your career, you mentioned your dad, suggesting to you that you go into computer science and, the getting interested in machine learning and neural networks and that type of thing. It's experiences and circumstances and other people, they happen to all of us. So circumstances come up, and that happens to everybody. People meet people all the time. But not every single one of those people achieves a massive level of success the way that you have. So I guess my question is, what is it about you in particular that you think has led to your success? So, like I said, people have circumstances all the time. People meet people all the time, and not everybody ends up being successful. So, but you did. So what is it about you, do you think, that's led to your success?
Wow. That's a tall order. So it is, I looked at my career not very strategically. I never really planned things. In fact, my life taught me that nothing I ever planned for really worked out that way. Many of the things, including my career, were in some ways accidental, not in terms of lucky, but more in terms of different opportunities, as you pointed out, just present themselves. And yes, some people are really good at creating opportunities. I think for me, it was more about recognizing a good opportunity when you see it, so having some judgment. And often that was even a gut reaction. So I picked, for instance, my first job going to IBM. I just loved the atmosphere, the people there, the people to work with. There seemed to be a sense of collaboration and friendship. And for instance, talking of mentors, I hadn't even signed the job yet. But, oh, by the way, I was 8 months pregnant when I interviewed. That was fun. Everybody was tiptoeing around the topic. It was really fun.
Right, because they can't ask you, but it's
Exactly.
really obvious at that point.
And the head of the department was Brenda Dietrich, and she herself is an incredibly successful woman. She raised 4 kids, and she sent me a letter congratulating me to the birth of my kid. And it felt like a place where these things are acknowledged as being part of your life. And so similarly, choosing my PhD advisor. So, hey, anybody out there trying to get a PhD, here's the trick. First, find a good advisor, and then do whatever topic, whatever, doesn't matter.
Totally.
But finding a person you feel comfortable working with and for, who has really your best interests at heart. And that kind of, you can rely on your gut to some extent, is very important. And so I would say that's part of judgment on who I want to work for, who would make a good mentor to teach me something and truly appreciate me for who I am. That was, I think, always present in my decisions. The other part, that actually brings us almost back to STEM. The reality is, if you are a halfway eloquent female in a STEM field like computer science and data science, I have the suspicion that it has worked very much in my favor.
Interesting.
I have seen that at IBM, you get very quickly put on the managerial talent list. You will be remembered. If you go and give a good tech talk, as good as one of your male colleagues, but you are one out of the 10 women speaking at the event, they will remember you. And I feel overall that me being a woman has possibly done me a lot more good than harm overall. Now, maybe I also just have a very kind of positive outlook. I call this psychological hygiene. I prefer to not wonder so much about the bad, but rather look at it in a positive way. And so maybe I'm just making this up. It's kind of hard to tell by a sample size of 1 what really was the cause. But a lot of the things that I now, looking back, recall in terms of interactions, I was very fortunate, and I suspect gender had something to do with it.
That's really interesting. And I think the discussion that's happening around that is it's a hard one within really any industry, STEM included. It's a hard one because there's no doubt that if there's 100 people in the room and 2 of them are women, it's a lot easier to remember who was a person who spoke when she was one of the 2 women who spoke. There's no doubt that does play a role and make things, make you stand out more. And there's no doubt too that as companies are trying to, even things out or even the playing field, they're trying to find these good examples of women who can be leaders to lead teams, because it's, again, tough. It's tough to be the first person who does something. You really need an example of that person, or an example of someone like you who's done it before you're willing to push really hard. Or a lot of people need that. So yeah, I could see it operating in both directions. And at the same point, I can also see a point that you made earlier where, knowing those things, some people could possibly think, oh my gosh, did I only get that because I'm a woman? Or did they give that to me, and would they have done the same thing if I was a man? I would encourage people to go back and listen to your bio before they make that judgment about you, because I definitely don't think we're in that situation here. But, it makes it a very complicated but important discussion for us to have. And I don't have all the answers, but what I will say is that there's some complex stuff underneath those covers, and you've touched on a lot of it with a lot of the things that you've brought up. So as you look ahead, what's your next big goal? Maybe it's in your career, maybe it's somewhere else. What's the next big thing you're working on?
So I think that this is really an incredibly exciting time where, as data science becomes so much more broadly kind of infused in our lives, I feel very strongly about being able to communicate to the many different constituents what's actually happening. Mm-hmm. To your earlier point, for a lot of them, it's a black box, and the industry itself almost likes to embellish the hype of, calling it artificial intelligence or whatever else you want. And so I feel that it's really a fascinating challenge to have like a broader education of what these things truly are, what they can do, and what they cannot do, because you can be wrong on both sides. You can blindly trust algorithms when I personally don't think you should. By the same token, I'm so amazed and still today fascinated by what that technology can do if it's done right. So I feel that besides building things and learning more, my role as maybe an educator or communicator is likely going to increase over the next couple of years.
Totally agree. Oh my gosh. When you said people like to embellish what happens within this field, you didn't get to see my eye roll. It's amazing what you hear sometimes. It's kind of crazy. So as you look back now, think about your career, the trajectory you've had, everything you've encountered, what advice would you have for other women?
So I have often kind of worked with some junior women, whether they were here at the Dstillary or in other places, and I'm not really sure how to provide confidence in yourself. I think this is really where a lot of that starts, how to not wonder too much whether you're good enough or not. And very often I find people who are actually extremely good be the ones who worry the most. It almost comes with the motivation. It's what drives us to get better. But I would love to tell all of you, don't worry so much. Just pick something that you're really excited at doing and give it your all, and maybe put some of the doubting thoughts and the imposter syndrome that many of us suffer from on the back burner. And just trust me when I tell you I've probably been there, and typically nothing good comes from dwelling too much on those. The second part is find yourself great people to work with. I have learned so much from people from very different fields, and ultimately, although being an introvert by nature, the irony today is that I have somehow arrived at a point where I have an amazing network of friends in many different places that I have worked with and learned. So pretty much anything that comes to me on my table, like for instance this podcast, I look at as an opportunity to do something fun and learn something new. And my standard answer is always yes, unless I have a good reason to say no. So I'm not being strategic or kind of planning ahead, but take chances and really the best opportunities are some of these things that arise accidentally around you, and prove yourself through that, through the friends that you make, and stop wondering too much whether you're good enough.
You are awesome. You're so awesome. Like perma smile on my face, I guarantee for the rest of the day. That was perfect and amazing. I have one final question, and it is a question that I ask every single person who is on the podcast. We have all along throughout the episodes that I've been releasing, we've been compiling a growing Spotify Power playlist, which is basically a bunch of songs that are all curated by the women I've been interviewing, and each guest gives me her contribution to that playlist. So I have to ask you for whatever your favorite motivational song is, so I can add it to our playlist.
So my motivational songs are all instrumentals because my brain doesn't work if there's any language going on that I understand. So when I was 10, I could still listen to English songs. These days, no longer. So unfortunately, or fortunately, I love to really listen to some of the more modern, even crossover. I love what Max Richter has done, his re-recording of Vivaldi. I find absolutely fascinating. I have played around with things like E.S. Posthumous. And this is just really strong, big orchestral work that, I don't know, it just puts my brain in this, what they call flow in psychology. It's just everything around you falls away and you're just in that one thing that you're trying to do.
Beautiful. Those are awesome, awesome additions. And if I can find them on Spotify, which I can find almost everything's on Spotify these days, I will definitely add them to our playlist. I really appreciate it. I can't thank you enough for saying yes to this podcast and being willing to be here. Some of the people that you've spoken to and some of the other podcasts that you've been on are much greater listenership than what mine is. And so I appreciate that you're still willing to reach out and share your story and everything that you've learned. I so appreciate it. This has been fantastic.
Thank you so much for having me.
Take risks and say yes. Oh my God, when it all comes down to it, that is exactly right, isn't it? I mean, I've done a bunch of these interviews now, and one common theme running through a countless number of them is that risk-taking is what leads you to massive growth. We just don't get there by staying comfortable. I also love that she called out the imposter syndrome. Can I be honest? So my real job is in data science. And when I learned about Claudia and her work, I instantly knew that I wanted to interview her for an episode for this podcast. But I also immediately felt like the work that I do isn't anywhere close to the work that she does. Then I listened to an interview she gave on another podcast called Partially Derivative. If you're at all nerdy, you would really love that podcast. And I realized that we have a pretty similar approach to the field. So maybe I shouldn't sell myself completely short, and you shouldn't either. I really hope you enjoyed meeting Claudia as much as I did. Now, hey, you guys are starting to nominate people to be featured on this podcast, and I love that. What is cooler than having women lift each other up to be celebrated in this way? If you know someone who might make a great guest, head over to aprilseifert.com and tell me about her through my contact page. She might be the next woman to be featured on this podcast. If you're enjoying these interviews, please leave me a rating and a review on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. I'm kind of everywhere these days. Thank you for joining me for this episode, and there are so many amazing women coming up in the weeks to follow, and I can't wait for you to meet them. So until then, have an inspiring week.